Okay. Let's hear this hot take.
Okay, I have a hot take. So lately, I've been working with a lot of Cloudflare stuff, and first of all, it's freaking cool. That's not the hot take. Like the fact that you can spin up like D1, KV, R2, all that stuff right into Worker. They also have Workers playgrounds. Really, really, really good developer platform. My hot take is that integrating it with certain applications like Next.js, like Remix, in their pages environment is too difficult. Like for instance, that like the biggest problem I have with Cloudflare's Workers environment or Pages environment, I guess specifically, is the way they pass in environment variables. They treat everything as like essentially an endpoint when you're trying to run an entire application in there, and so they'll provide you a context to your request handler, which has your environment variables from context from Cloudflare rather. And like, how do you pass them around your app? You're not just gonna like prop drill them essentially throughout your application wherever you need them. Like we need global environment variables in the Workers environment, in the Pages environment. That's my hot take.
I know nothing about this.
Oh, you're shaking your
Probably
head a little bit, James.
it's probably best that you don't. Yeah, we're big fans of Cloudflare. Like we're in the launch prep program right now,
Nice.
which we just got into for April, like the third cohort. But yeah, there are some rough edges that they have like a really good like overall developer platform,
Yes.
but just making some of it work or the docs or some of the new features they launch where it's like, oh, it doesn't actually work properly the way we expect it to. That's been a fun experiment because we use Cloudflare for Unkey. Like everything's on Cloudflare except from our Next.js app. So like all our APIs and our durable objects and stuff like that, and all the
Yeah.
caching is done through Cloudflare.
See, that's the thing. Is as soon as you want to run like an app on Cloudflare, it gets more difficult. Their integration story isn't great, but for single endpoints, for access to databases and key value stores, like second to none, all distributed, all super fast. Like that's great. So then, I guess my question for you then is like, okay, given that your Next.js app is hosted, probably on Vercel?
Yep.
Are you seeing latency, like more latency between your Next.js app and your Unkey endpoints that are hosted on Cloudflare, right? I'm assuming there could be cost savings or latency savings if you hosted everything on Cloudflare.
Yeah, because the Next.js app that we have is just a dashboard, so it just has like analytics. You can create keys on there and a bunch of other stuff. Like
It doesn't have to be that path. It's not in the customer's critical path.
Right. So even the latency we have is minimal because it's just going to AWS really, and then from AWS to Cloudflare and back. It's not like it's not as fast as if it was all on Cloudflare where it would basically be zero.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, it's minimal enough that like it doesn't affect any usage if you're using the dashboard at all.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know. I think a dream of mine is to like finally move my entire website over to Cloudflare, and there's like so many random things standing in the way. Like I just recently used Vite to bundle all of my blog posts, and I got everything moved over to Cloudflare, and like, oh, sorry, your bundle's too big. We can't run it in Workers. It's like, oh, okay, so now I have to rethink that entire architecture.
Yeah, it is, some of that is just painful. All around.
At the end of the day, I think like if you're using that distributed SQLite and you're using Workers to access it, where they intelligently select where your worker runs and what SQLite replica it talks to, it's so fast. You're guaranteeing that it's in the same region essentially.
Yep.
So it's super fast. How's pricing been with them? What do you think?
It's pretty good. Like our bill for Cloudflare is pretty small. And we're using a lot of features like durable objects, workers, we're using queues, I think that's pretty much everything. Like the most expensive thing they have is queues. And the only reason we're using that is because we frequently hit the rate limiting features of other products that we're using. So we have to queue it up and send it to them.
Gotcha.
But even that's like reasonable. It's like I think it's like $1.20 per million requests. Which is like still like, unless you're doing billions, it's pretty reasonable.
Okay, I'll save the final like monthly operating cost price for later when we're actually
Sure.
recording the podcast, but I cannot wait to hear that number given
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
it sounds like it's pennies. It's crazy.
Yep.
I was I got nothing.
Amy has nothing.
I know nothing about this.
Amy, what's up with that chair
Um,
behind you? That weird
What
stool
chair? Oh,
chair.
well, see, and this is like the nasty view where you get all the
Mhm,
junk
mhm.
that you don't normally see.
Yep.
So, this is a little stool right here. And so since I have a standing desk, I have sitting, standing, and then in between. So that's for the in between.
That's kind of cool.
It's okay. It's also by Autonomous, which did this chair and the desk. It's not like super comfortable long term. Mostly my kids. It has like a rocky bottom. I don't know if you can tell from the picture, the angle. My kids just love to like come in and
Wobble around on it for a while.
Yes, and it drives me crazy.
Yep.
So there's that. Got the dog bed, and then that's where the Oculus lives. This is like a little desk kind of on wheels, and it's just kind of in the way more than anything else. It was a cheapo thing that I ordered on Amazon because I needed like a space for something. The best thing that it did for me was during COVID, my project was to digitize our entire DVD library and put everything on Plex on our NAS drive. And so I had a computer just sitting here running nonstop, ripping
Yeah, that's
things.
good excuse.
Yeah. So, but since then, it really is just kind of in the way. Yeah. And I was also, because I was, we were talking about before the show, my mic settings got messed up. So I was going back through old photos trying to figure out what the knobs needed to be. And I found a few desk pictures where I was like, wow, my desk was really clean. So it's just not, well, it's kind of messy right now, but in general, I try and keep the workspace pretty clean, but I've accumulated things around the edge, around the fringe. So I just need to go through and like
move some
put all that
stuff.
stuff. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Like,
do the same thing.
Forgot how nice that is. Just that kind of
just have the working environment nice and clean. Yeah. Mine used to be like that. It's not anymore. Stuff everywhere.
Usually I start the day off with a fairly clean desk, and then it mostly accumulates cups.
Yep.
As I work, and you can tell how busy I am based on how many cups are on my desk.
Yeah, same for me.
So, and then like in the morning, I'll usually like clear it off, take all the cups to the kitchen.
Start over.
Yeah.
Start the count. Yep.
Yes.
Same thing.
I'm just not a cup person. Like I reuse I've got 2 Yetis. Got my water Yeti and my coffee Yeti.
Oh,
that's it.
funny.
That's
Do you
all I
wash them
need.
every night?
I rinse them.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
Good enough.
Yeah.
So-
This is how I build up immunity in my body.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, I mean, you don't put creamer or anything in your coffee, do you just?
I do.
No, I can't do that.
Hey, I've never had an issue.
Right.
But then
right.
again, I'll be drinking like the same cup of coffee at 12 hours from now, and
Yeah.
Henry's like, that cream that milk's been sitting in there all day.
Yeah.
So I went to Starbucks this morning. I generally go to Chick-fil-A for lunch. So I'll get 2 more cups after lunch, and then whatever happens after. So that's where they're disposable cups from restaurants. That's why I don't necessarily have the same cup every day. Oh, good times. Okay, well, we can get into the meat. I'll go ahead and do the formal intro, and I'm excited about this conversation.
Me too.
So, okay. Welcome to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web design and development with a little bit of zest. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about Unkey, which is a side project now VC backed. And I didn't cue up the music.
I need to be on deck with that because it happens every time, and now I know how to do it.
For development and design, who would have guessed? Well, we can do them both, even add a little zest. So turn up the volume, get ready for the best. Let's get it started in this episode of Compressed.
What's fun is that this actually doesn't come through in the recording that I download.
Oh, nice.
Space. Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Dutton. I am a core team member of Redwood JS.
Hey, y'all. My name is Brad Garapi. I'm a front-end developer at Atlassian working on Confluence.
And today we have with us James Perkins.
It's my
Welcome,
third
James.
time.
Woohoo!
Yay.
The jacket.
with a new introduction now these days.
Wait,
I'm
okay,
James.
so
I think you've had a different introduction every time we've had you on.
Yep.
Impressive.
Yep.
Well, hopefully that doesn't mean that,
Yeah. This is the last
know.
time. We won't do another one. This is it. Get to keep the same one.
Awesome. Well, I did want to highlight our sponsor today. Our sponsor is Postman. So they are a fantastic tool for really digging into your API, especially if you're using a third-party REST API. So I love being able to plug in to their URL bar what that endpoint is and be able to parse all of that information. So they have a conference coming up in wait for it, in 2 weeks, or a week and a half. And James and I will be there in person in San Francisco. So it's called PostCon. We would love for you to join us, especially if you already are in San Francisco and travel is not an issue. But either way, we'd love to see you there. We're excited about the stuff that they're doing and glad that we can support them on the podcast and in person. So special thanks to Postman for sponsoring.
dude, so James, welcome to the podcast. Maybe we should take like a quick tour down memory lane and think back about the past couple times you've been on the show. Can you remember what you came on to talk about the first few times?
Yeah, so I think the first time it was Tina CMS and
yeah.
open source CMS. And then the second time was about building side projects.
Yeah.
And now this time is taking a side project and making it VC backed. So progression.
Yeah, progression. Okay, so yeah, so you're currently working on something called Unkey. Give us like a 5-second breakdown, then we'll talk about like where it all came from and how it all started.
Yeah, so Unkey is essentially a new API management platform where we meet developers what they already know, which is just a global API. We have a UI that you can use too, but the idea is that you know how REST API works so that you don't need a whole DevOps team to either implement API keys or rate limiting and in the future gateways. And essentially the idea is, anyone can protect an API or create a new public API and do it in a way that makes sense for them.
Okay. And so does this mean it does like API management or is it just the key management?
Yeah, right now it just does key management and then standalone rate limiting. So if you've used Upstash rate limiter in the past where you kind of just rate limit your endpoints internally, same idea, you can do it with Unkey, except from it's globally distributed and super low latency. And then the other part is, you can create keys, manage those keys, and do all the things you would need if you wanted to issue API keys to users.
Gotcha. Okay, so like, let's go back. Let's hear the origin story of Unkey. Like, what were you doing where you had to implement this yourself, or like, what got you thinking about this problem space in the first place?
Yeah, so I can't take credit for any of this. But Andreas, my co-founder and the CTO, he pitched me the idea of creating a blog post between Clerk and Upstash, because that's where we both worked, where we could kind of build out a similar feature where like you could issue API keys and give those to your users using Clerk and Redis. And then we talked about it more sort of through Discord DMs. And I was like, I think this might actually be a problem that needs to be solved at a real level versus just like a blog post that's been marketing. So we sat down, we talked about it a bit more, and we decided, okay, let's build like an open source side project and see if anyone's interested, and then we'll go from there. So the origin story really is that we were going to do a blog post and decided that the blog post just wasn't enough, and this is a real issue. I've been in the industry a long time, and I've built out APIs that people use and consume, and it's always an issue, but it always becomes an issue after you've finished, where you realize that, my user, a user in Germany is now getting really slow response from the API. That's super annoying. Or, man, I wish we did rate limiting in a different way than we did this time, and now it's too late, and now you have to re-architect all your code. or, you know, any of those kinds of things that you start to realize after you've built your API that then you have to go and implement yourself, which then takes more development time. And this API project that was originally 2 months is now 6 months, and then it's a year, and then it's 2 years, and it just continuously grows. And so we decided to just tackle it right from the beginning and give you the way to do that so that you can focus on those core features that the API is used for versus worrying about how security runs.
So I'm assuming... Oh, go ahead.
One of my favorite things that people talk about when you're trying to found a company is that a lot of times that idea comes from somewhere that you're already at, something that you're already doing and something that you already have experience with versus just some other random problem that you know nothing about.
That's definitely true for the most part. You probably have experienced something that then influences the founding of a company, right? So like, oh, this really sucks. I bet I could do something better. Like Clerk's a good example of that, which was like the authentication space is kind of mediocre. Like you have Auth0, which is like everybody knew at the time and everybody's using. But like maybe we can make it better. Maybe we could do something that makes more sense for users. Maybe we can make it easier for users. And you kind of go down this path of like, well, if we do that, like what would make what's out there today better? And then you start to kind of iterate on that. And that's kind of the same with Unkey. Like we looked in the space and nobody was doing API keys. They were all doing gateways, which is like a whole different problem that's way more in depth, takes a lot more time, and usually you have to be really experienced in gateways.
Wait, what? Okay, can you explain the difference? Because I actually don't know the difference.
Yeah, so
well, I don't really know what a gateway is.
Yeah, so like a gateway essentially sits in between your end user and your actual like compute, wherever that might be. And the idea is that you send a request through that gateway, and then it decides what to do with it, whether that's to route it, whether that's to say like, oh, you don't have an API key, or you don't have a JSON web token, or you don't have this to authenticate yourself. And
it's like a standalone middleware that handles the auth piece pretty much. Okay.
Yeah, and it can handle routing and caching and a bunch of other stuff. But the idea is basically it sits in the middle so it can protect like resources on the other side. Yeah, versus an API key where you're actually hitting the resource first and then verifying whether that user is allowed access.
Right. Okay, so, and I'm assuming like this blog post didn't have all these features in it that you were going to do. You know, initially the scope of the blog post was what? And then
really
how
small.
did you grow it?
Yeah. So originally it was very small. It was just going to be like how to issue API keys with rate limiting, and that would have been it. Yeah. And then that was kind of V0 for us, was just like, can we do that? And then that turned into like, oh, we need all these other features too. Like, what happens if you need to give an audit person access to the API, but you only want to give it for a week? Like, how do we do that? Okay, we need keys that expire automatically. Or what if you're building an AI that has token-based usage? Well, how can we do that with an API key? And it just kind of turned into all the features that we have today.
Yeah. Yeah, and those are all like real use cases that, like you said, only show up after you're done building the feature in and of itself.
Yep.
So like, how did you and your co-founder sit there and say, this is viable? Like, how do you know it's worth pursuing rather than just saying, oh, we should just build some open source library and make this easy and whatnot?
Yeah, so that was kind of weird for us. So we were kind of pushed into it being viable. So when we released in June, the end of June, and we began
2023?
Yep,
okay.
2023. So we began in the beginning of June. We would V0, or what was released at the time was the end of June. And we had a bunch of signups and people were testing the platform, and we had this like really big spike in users, and it was kind of semi unexpected. And a lot of that was just exploration, like people trying to decide what the platform did or what it was for. And then we had other friends who were already founders being like, you have something here, you should start talking to people. This is a real problem. You really should start talking to VCs or whatever and go all in on this. And then we had some discussions in the background of like, nah, I'm kind of really happy where I'm at. Like, I love Clerk, and Clerk stuff's really great, and I'm really happy at Upstash. And then we started talking to VCs, and like our first investor was like, here's $500,000. And it's hard to be like, oh, okay, well, this is clearly not viable because someone wants to give you a bunch of money. And it was kind of that. And they had, Tim, who is this investor who works at Essence and runs Essence, was like, oh, I can see where this could go. So when you turn something from a side project into something that's VC backed, it's not about what you have today, it's where it could go in the future. Could it really be $1 billion company, or is it just like not viable at all? And Tim was like, oh, I could see this being, and here's a bunch of ideas that we hadn't even thought about. So he was already thinking like, oh, here's a bunch of ideas that you could potentially look into and consider, and what do you think about this or that, or like, okay, what's the future? And once we had Tim on board, it became very easy to get more money. Like there was a lot of people like once you have one VC, it's very easy to sort of close the gap. And originally we were going to just go for $500,000. So that was the plan, was like, do $500,000. Andreas and I can like leave the companies that we're at and we'll just do it together. And then we found out that there was more people that wanted to be investors, and that turned from $500,000 to $1.5 million. And then we were like, okay, well, that's a lot of money. I think we can do a lot with that. That's like two years worth of runway. We can build a company and hire employees and really build what we want and do it quicker than if it was just us two.
So you were talking about like signal, like how the spike in users that you had showed that there was interest. Is that like 100 users sign up on, in the first week? I mean, what's enough signal?
It was 700 users in the first like 10 days, I think.
Okay, that's big.
It was like a really big, yeah. So it was like a really big spike, and then that continues. Like it slowed down after the initial like launch posts and things, but like we had like 700 users, and then we were like, okay, that's a lot. And then we had our client. We put pricing in after the fact, so we launched. It was 100% free, and then we were like, okay, we'll have a free tier, and then we'll do pricing. So we launched our pricing about 2 weeks or maybe less right afterwards, and then within 2 days we had someone that wanted to pay and had quite a reasonable amount of volume, like in the hundreds of thousands of requests a month. And in the beginning we were like, great, that sounds amazing, like that's a number that we didn't even fathom would exist. And now they do, somewhere in the region of 4 to 5 million a month in requests, which, was our first customer, and they've been happy since day one.
When they wanted to pay, were they saying like, hey, we just like this, we want to give you some money? Or did it kind of come with like, hey, we want to see these features, how do we pay you to kind of move this forward?
Yeah, so it wasn't a, hey, here's money and we want these features. It was very much like, you happen to launch a product at the exact right time when we're building our API and we don't want to do this work. We did add a couple of features for them, like IP whitelisting was something they needed.
Yeah.
So we just added that like on the fly as like, okay, yeah, we can do that. It's not a big deal. It should take like a few days. But outside of that was their only request, and we delivered that for them immediately, and they were already paying before we delivered it.
Sweet. Yeah, so that's a very great first customer.
Right.
Just like, yeah, just everything aligns.
Yep. Yeah, we couldn't have asked for a better first like customer with usage. Was just like, yeah, we just need what you have, and you have what we need, so let's just do this right now.
So going back to talking and trying to find a VC, like, where do you even start? Did you just have this person's name in your Rolodex?
I wish.
Or...
no.
Did you have a Rolodex?
yeah. No. So we were introduced to the VC from another founder. So it was someone that was already had already spoken to him. I think they were backed by him. I can't remember exactly, but he was like, hey, this guy is interested in open source tools, which we were, and 2 is really in that kind of space and has a lot of knowledge. Let me like do an intro through email, and then you guys can talk about it. But on the other hand, VCs will come knocking at your door fairly frequently, if they think it's like a viable product and they might be interested in sort of backing it. So Tim was like an intro, but we had VCs sending us emails or Twitter DMs or LinkedIn messages asking for a meeting. And then once you have the ball rolling and they understand that, oh, there's already an investor, like that kind of is kind of that FOMO of like, oh, we could miss out on this big project. So you do get a few of those. And then as time goes on, like we raised, and then immediately after your raise, you get more VCs interested because they're like, oh, you raised a bunch of money. Like, when are you raising more? Because maybe we would be interested. And when can we talk to you? And, then you spend a lot of time talking to VCs outside of fundraising, where you're just kind of prepping them for on this date was probably when we're going to start again. If you're interested, let us know and we'll send you an email. And that kind of how it works.
What kind of things are you including in your pitch? Because you were talking about how a lot of times they want to know where the company can go. Are you just trying to say like, oh, well, maybe we could do these features?
Yeah, so pitches are weird. I've never done one before, obviously. So a pitch essentially is today, and then like a year from now, and then like 5 years from now is really what it talks about. And you don't have to deliver any of the things in the 5-year plan, really. Like everything could change, right? You could pivot, or you could just like decide that this is not really a feature that you need anymore. But what they're looking for is indicators that you're not just, you've built this one thing and that's it. Like the end. Like I don't have any more ideas for this company. What we're building is this one piece, and they'll look at the market as a whole and decide whether or not what you have today and what you're thinking of building, it actually makes sense. And some of those VCs would, you could have 2 or 3 meetings with and discuss like a bunch of different things, and then they make a decision. Others were, 1 meeting and then let me write you a check. It just depends on if they can align with the vision that you have.
What kind of stipulations comes with that money? Because it's not like they're just giving it to you unless it's an angel investor.
Yeah. So really, the stipulations in pre-seed are basically like, we want the next round. So that's usually the only stipulation you have, is that they get priority on the next rounds. And that can continue on for like Series A and Series B and Series C. Essentially what they're doing is taking a percentage of your company away from you. So Andreas and I had 85% of the company, and 15% was left over for employees. And they take a portion of Andreas and I's overall shares. And in the beginning, when you do what's called a safe, which is essentially just like, give me the money and we'll promise that when we do like a price round, like you'll get the shares that you're owed. And basically, there aren't really many stipulations in the beginning. It's just like, I want priority, and not everybody wants priority. So they can choose to have priority or not. And that's usually like a side letter that says that, on the next round, I get first refusal and I get the best rates and X, Y, and Z. And that just gives them the option of whether to bow out or to continue investing.
So do they only get that money if you go public? Or are there other situations?
There's other situations. So It's just a liquid event. So that could be that some, like, for example, Cloudflare tomorrow could be like, hey, we want to buy Unkey from you. And we'll give you 10 million. We'll give you $12 million to sell Unkey to us. And they get the percentage of what they invested. So, if they invested up to 10% or whatever, they would get 10% of that money.
Got it. What's it like working with the founder?
It's amazing.
Really?
Highly recommend. Don't do it on your own.
Really?
Yeah. So being a founder comes with lots of things that you have to do that isn't shipping code. And if you're the only person, it's very hard to ship code and also do all the other things that you need to do, right? Like paperwork and updating investors and dealing with other VCs that are interested, taxes and accounting and bookkeeping. All those things take away from building a product. So when we were like, okay, we're going to do this together, we made the decision that I would do the CEO stuff and the president stuff, and he would do the CTO role and ship code. So I don't ship as much code as I used to, and I take care of everything else so that he can be focused on like, where is the product going? And I focus more on like the long-term vision of the company. which makes it really easy. But if you have to do that all yourself, which some people are, you'll find that it's just a lot of extra paperwork that you really don't want to do. So you have to work even more hours than you would if you're co-founding with somebody else. But you also have to find the right person. That's the key element, is finding the right person that you feel comfortable in talking to, and you can have discussions that for some people maybe, like it's not a great discussion. Maybe you have to talk about something that you don't particularly like, or something's going wrong, and you have to be able to talk to that person and feel comfortable that they're not going to be offended by what you're saying, and vice versa. Like on the highs, like is someone you can share it with. And if you find that right person and they have the right personality, it's really, really good.
How have you like adapted to doing these like CEO type roles? Did you find that it was really difficult to lean into, or were you excited to learn about it? Do you feel bogged down, or is it like invigorating?
I think it's 50-50 on that. So it was like, oh, I'm really excited to kind of do this thing. I've never done this before. Like I've done engineering and I've done management and I've done this and I've done that, but I've never really done this whole sort of being a founder, being a CEO. So I really enjoy my day-to-day stuff, and sometimes it can be a bit, oh, I wish I was shipping code kind of attitude. And then usually I end up doing something. Like I'll be like, okay, let me go and look in Linear and see if there's a ticket that's like small enough that I'm not going to slow the entire team down if it takes me like a week and a half to do, because I got other obligations. But overall, I've really enjoyed just like being in the CEO role and doing all the things that just need to get done. And I've always been like that. I'm always that person that's just like, well, it's got to get done, so I might as well just do it. So it was a nice change to go from like, well, I got to ship code and also this needs to get done, to I have a primary focus and I can do those things.
How many employees do you have?
We now have 5 total, including Andreas and I. So we just hired a design engineer this week.
Nice.
He just started on Monday.
And what roles are the 5 employees?
Yeah, so there's obviously Andreas and I, CTO and CEO, and then the other guys there's 2 engineers and then 1 design engineer, and that's it. And then we do technically have a contractor who is our designer, who does all the design work for the new landing page that's coming. That will probably come before this release happens of this podcast. But yeah, we've been working on that for a little bit.
I think it already looks pretty dang good. I kind of like that cool backgroundy thing that you can hover over on the landing page. I think it's pretty slick.
Fun fact, that's a Tailwind template.
Yeah, buddy.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we shipped everything with just templates, and we reused a bunch of components that we had, and we're using Shadchien for everything in the dashboard. Like we just reused anything that we had, and then we just built on top of that, and that was the fastest way to like basically an MVP.
Oh yeah.
And now we're going in and being like, okay, now we actually have money. We should make our homepage actually looks like something cool.
Yeah.
And something that's exciting, and the copy makes sense, and really do all those kinds of things.
I recognize it now.
Yep.
But I think that goes to show people don't have to overcomplicate it.
Yeah.
Just
And I
do
I
what
think
works. Prove it.
Yeah, I think people get bogged down with like, oh, we need a really flashy like landing page, and the dashboard's got to be really awesome from the beginning. But it's like, no, it just needs to be functional enough that people can use it.
Mm-hmm.
And once they use like the core product, whatever your core product is, that's the part that they care about. And we've proved that because like, yeah, our landing page is mediocre at best. Between the Tailwind template and then just like the content that's on there, it's not the greatest. And we just shipped and just kept shipping, and it shows that as long as your core product is good, people don't really care too much about your landing page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's not only does it have to be a good idea, good product market fit type thing, but I also think you need to have documentation that is more than good enough. Because if people find any friction points in using your thing, just not going to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's something that we're DX focused, so like we want the developer experience to be as good as possible, and we spend a lot of time like making minor tweaks to our docs all the time. Of like, we get feedback like, I don't understand how this works, or this is too complicated, or blah blah blah, and then we go in and make some more changes. And and hope that those kind of resolve the issue. And yeah, we've always been very much like, my whole thing has been like, a feature's not released until we have docs. And that's played really well for us over time.
Go ahead.
Oh, I
Amy.
was going to say, how did you decide to structure your docs? Because that's one thing that I'm starting to do at Redwood is revisit our documentation, make it beginner friendly. Like, how do you think about those things?
We just kind of felt that we would just do it in the beginning and just dump everything, like on the because we're using Mintlify for our docs. Shout out to them. They've allowed us to do a lot. And we essentially just was like, in the beginning, it was just like, okay, just dump it all on the left sidebar. We'll just do really detailed docs and people can find what they need, and we'll do a quick start that shows you how to like get started, and then we'll kind of call it quits at that point. And now we're slowly doing the restructure of like, okay, well, now we have like standalone rate limiting that can have its own section, and APIs and keys can have their own section. And when gateways come in, that'll have its own section. But it's really hard. Like, docs are probably the hardest thing that people think should be really easy, but they're really not. And yeah, we've just been building on the process of like what I learned at Clerk and how those docs were structured and how Upstash was structured, and just kind of using what we know and trying to fit those into what we have.
So now's probably like a good time to talk about, okay, like what is Unkey's like core feature? And then I want to learn a little bit about like how you accomplish it, how it's architected. You talked a little bit about your Next.js app, your Cloudflare backend stuff. Let's get into the details.
Yeah, so Unkey's core features right now are split into two. So we have standalone rate limiting, which allows you to just rate limit anything that you need rate limiting. So if you have TRPC routes, you can rate limit those. Or the other feature, which is the API keys, which allows you to create, manage, and sort of revoke those keys. And then on top of that, we have analytics that go, are basically real time. So as soon as you create a key, we have analytics on that. We have all logging on that. We have all those kinds of things. But the core features are split into two, but they use the same architecture really behind the scenes. And so we have our Next.js application, which is the dashboard, which is basically just app router plus TRPC. And that gives you some analytical data that you can play around with and see like, oh, which of my users is using the most. It also allows you to create roles and permissions if you're using RBAC and things like that. And then the API keys themselves have a bunch of different features. So we have standalone, just like regular rate limiting. So you just set it as you need, and then we'll rate limit those keys based upon whatever you put in there. Then we have thing called basically usage based. So you set like this key can be used 10 times. And then after 10 times, we'll just basically return that this key can't be used anymore.
Yep.
And then that also has an automatic refill feature. So if you're charging someone monthly to access an API, you can set in our thing like every 30 days refill this to 100 or whatever the number is, and we'll add those back in. And then we have an expiration one, which allows you just to expire a key after a certain date. So if you're doing free trials, after 7 days, you can just disable the key. And then if they don't pay, then fine. And if they do pay, you can just update the key and re-enable it. And then we have a few other things. Permissions I just talked about. So if you want to really set roles and permissions on endpoints, you can do that. We have metadata, which is basically just a free-form JSON field. So you can put whatever you want in there. So if if you want to put your Stripe information in there for some reason, you could do that. Or some other information about the user or what they're doing, all those kinds of things. It's basically an escape hatch for things that we don't support, so that you can have those accessible on the keys. And that's basically the two main features. And then the architecture behind the scenes is that we're using Cloudflare to do a lot of what we're doing. We're using Hono to drive our API. And then we're using durable objects to essentially have heavy cached all the time to make it super, super fast. So once you use a key or once you create a key, we cache it immediately. And then after that, basically you get the lowest latency possible. If the key is not used for a specific amount of time, then it's uncached, and then the first request is a bit slower than the rest. And then it gets recached back into the durable object, and then you can go about your way. And what makes us kind of different from a lot of places is that because we're on Cloudflare, we're globally distributed immediately. So regardless of where your user is and where you are, we can essentially give you low latency responses regardless. And our response time is really, really low. It's anywhere like I think our slowest region's like 100 milliseconds. But most places it's sub 30 for the most part. So that means that you don't have to be like, oh, well, Unkey's going to slow us down at the critical path. Like, no, we can get, under 30 milliseconds in a lot of places. Like if you're in the Americas, it's even lower. And essentially that allows us to do a lot of the work and give you this globally distributed API keys. And then we're using Planet Scale for our database to store some things in there. And we have read replicas. And then we also have a feature that's coming out that I can't really talk about, but it allows us to do some more like routing and stuff behind the scenes so that you get the database read from wherever that location may be versus having to go to a centralized one in the US, and that kind of slows you down when you're doing specific tasks. But that's basically the architecture and how it's built.
So then, like usage wise, like if I've used the Unkey dashboard to create an API key, right? Now, how do I, as the customer, utilize that key to go hit? Because I guess I'm protecting my own endpoint, as a customer. I guess I talk to your service first, get back a response, and then talk to my service, or are you a proxy in between me and my own backend?
So we're not a proxy right now.
Okay.
So essentially what you do is you make a request to our API. So we have an API that basically, if you've got a key that's already created, or you want to create a key in the API, you can do either. There's a verify key endpoint, which is just a REST API. You just hit it, and we'll give you a response back. And basically, it says result.valid is part of the response.
Right.
If it's valid and it says true, then let them do whatever they want with the resource. If it comes back as false, then don't. And then inside of that response, we have other things too. So like if you put how many are remain, like if you do the remaining feature, we'll actually return that so that you can return it to the user. And then we have SDKs in community-driven ones in a lot of languages, and then we have an official TypeScript SDK right now, soon to be official Go and Python.
Sweet. Okay, yeah, because at the end of the day, like really, your service is just kind of saying like yes or no, you have access to this or you don't. That's the true core of functionality, and the determination behind yes or no comes down to, like you said, a lot of different features, rate limiting, or just pure time based or usage based or all these things. Okay, that makes sense.
And the same with our rate limiting.
Crazy to me.
Yeah, and the same with the rate limiter too. So if you're using standalone rate limiting, the idea is exactly the same. So they make a request and you pass us like a user ID or an IP or whatever it might be, and we say yes or no, and then you can make a decision based upon that.
Oh, and that's a good point. Like, in what dimensions can you rate limit? Are you rate limiting by IP? Are you rate limiting by user? Does the customer get to decide? Here's the key, and then
So if you're using the API key, it's just the key. So the key decides if it should be rate limited. But if you're using our standalone rate limit package, it's whatever identifier you want.
Literally, it's any
user ID, email, IP address, favorite color, whatever you want to put in there, that's fine. And we'll every time we get a request with that specific one, we'll go and check and make sure they haven't hit their rate limits.
Okay, sweet. And then I also noticed you have like a very specific Next.js package, right? So in addition to these language-specific SDKs, they're generic, or for the most part, right? What does the Next.js package do that's extra special?
Yeah, so it's just a wrapper so that you can use it like in a route. And essentially the idea is you can wrap a request up in it, and we'll do all of the hard work for you.
Sure.
So that you don't have to write a bunch of code. Basically, we'll use that verify key endpoint to do the verification and give you a result back that you can use in middleware or on a server action or app route. Whatever you need, you can essentially wrap it up, and it just makes it a little bit easier. We found that people that have Next.js applications like a nice wrapper that just does what they want, and they can just do everything based upon that. And so it's just less code for a user to write.
That's so cool.
So, like, since you...
Sorry, I was just gonna a little color, but I just think that that's fascinating. Like when you say, "Oh, we do API keys," there's like so many usage context
Mm-hmm.
that people don't think about. And it's like, no wonder people are like, I don't want to write this stuff.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? It's just like auth in the same manner. Like if you look at front end auth and you auth is really easy. Sure, but also there are these 1,000 edge cases that you need to think about, and like session management and blah blah blah. And what if you need to add a new OAuth provider tomorrow? Like there's a bunch of work that you have to do. Like it's all those things compounded, and it's the same for this. It's like, oh yeah, building API auth is easy in air quotes, but okay, what do you got to think about? Global distribution, rate limiting, usage based, expiry, and then like the list goes on. And how do I know who's using it? So now you have to build an analytics out, and then it's just more and more things that when you're starting out is overwhelming. And if you're a first time builder of an API, like you just don't want to do this.
Well, and sometimes it doesn't even feel like that's the core functionality of your application.
Right.
It's like, I'm doing this other thing, but I have to have access. I don't want to waste my time trying to provide access when I'd rather be building these core features.
Yeah, exactly. Similar vein to like just auth in general. Like you don't want to spend your time building auth. You want to just be like, cool, I put auth in place. Now let me go back and build the features or the functionality or whatever. And it's the same idea here is like, you just want to build your API and have cool features come out of it, but you don't want to do all this extra work. So let us do it for you. And then at the end of the day, all you have to worry about is hitting us. And we'll do the rest for you, and it will be secure, and you won't have to worry about accidentally leaking your keys through a database. So we take care of that for you.
Yeah, security, I feel like, would be a big thing.
Yep. And we've spoken to a few people that are just storing like plain text API keys like in their database, and it's just like, oh, okay, don't do that. And like for us, we do one-way hash, so we can't show you the key ever again. Like it's done. Like there's no way for us to access what it is.
Interesting.
And so that makes it secure by default. Versus other people, maybe they're doing some other thing where you can see the key again, and then that like adds a layer of like security concern, because now there is a way for you to be able to show that key to the user, which means there is a way for a bad actor to figure out how to get that key.
So I guess that plays in with like I'll have environmental variables sometimes with services where they're like, we can only show you this one time, and it's like, it's my variable. Show it to me. But that makes sense then if it's a one-way hash for security purposes.
Yeah, they don't want liability of it.
Yeah.
And it's the same for us. We don't want the liability of accidentally, giving it to someone that we shouldn't. So we'll just one-way hash it, and now there's nothing you have to worry about. It's just that this key belongs to X user, and that's what you have to worry about.
Yeah. You also mentioned like logging and analytics. Talk a little bit about like how you accomplish that. And you said it was like almost real time. So how is it so fast? What are you using to do it?
Yeah, so we built our analytics on top of Tinybird. And essentially we pipe all of our data through them. And we can show that back to the user, because we have all the data that you're using, like, oh, this key ID and this and that. We can essentially show that to you on screen. And it's essentially real time, because as soon as you hit that button, we pipe that along to Tinybird. And say, hey, by the way, like this has just been used, like update this pipe, and then we retrieve that data back. And the idea is that
is it real time in your front end? Like, are you streaming updates to the front end? Okay.
Yeah. So like if you go in and use a key a bunch of times and go back to your dashboard, like right now you'd have to refresh the page to see the changes. Okay. But yeah, we'll just make another request to Tinybird and say, hey, show us this analytical data for this API, and we'll return the new data back.
Gotcha. I've never heard of Tinybird before, so that's
they're really
new.
cool.
How did you guys come across
them?
Andreas has used them in the past for other like core features and other open source projects he's built. And so he was like, yeah, we should use them. They're like really reliable, and they're really easy to use, and you can do a really, really complex things with them, and it's pretty cheap. And so, yeah, we use them to drive all the analytical data and all the audit logs that we have to all go through the same thing.
Sweet. Yeah, that's like a whole nother thing when it comes to API keys. It's like that's half of it. Now you got to know who's using them where. And
and it's hard for you to upsell a customer if you don't even know how much usage they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So you either have to go and dig around in your own logs to figure out, oh, yeah, this person did 100 million requests last month, or you could just log it to the dashboard or pull it from our API and say, oh, yeah, this guy did this many requests, we should probably call them and see, like send them an email and say, hey, by the way, like maybe enterprise is more for you because X, Y, and Z. And then you can start doing that upsell without having to worry about going and digging around in reports and making your own generation of reports and stuff.
Actually, speaking about upselling, pricing. How did you decide your pricing model? How did you pick your price points? What was the thought around that?
Yeah, so this is our second iteration of pricing. So when we launched, we just kind of based it around auth providers. We were like, what do auth providers charge? And we can do something similar, which is fine, except like if you've got lots of usage, like it doesn't make sense because we base all of our usage is that's how we base our pricing. So per request. And so we quickly figured out that doesn't work because if you might only have 10 users, but you're doing 1 million requests. So those don't align. So we kind of sat back down and kind of just figured out like, okay, this is how much it costs us to do X amount of requests. How can we then make some money based upon this? And then also provide a really cheap service. So that's kind of how we did it. And we give you basically a pro tier, which is $25 and you get X amount of requests. And if you're doing rate limiting, it's 2.5 million requests. And you're basically based around that. Originally, we charged for active keys. So you got like 2,500 active keys, and then anything after that we charge you for. And we just decided that wasn't worth it. So now you just get 1 million. But it's technically unlimited, but you get 1 million keys regardless. If you hit 1 million keys, then you wouldn't be in our pro tier anyway, pretty much, because like the pricing there then doesn't scale all the way out. Because you imagine all those keys have got to do at least 5 to 10 requests a month, and then you're talking, tens of millions of requests, and you should be talking to me about how we can help you get volume discounts. But yeah, it was really hard. We just kind of guessed, and then we iterated and we guessed again, and we'll probably iterate again. And it's just about guessing, really. I don't think there's a perfect pricing table out there for everyone. And it just takes time to figure out, okay, what's the most used features? Is anybody actually hitting this number? Okay, if they are hitting this number, how much are they really going above and beyond? And then like, does it really scale to that level? Like if they do 1 billion requests a month, is that really going to scale? And then you kind of just figure it out from there.
What about like the code that drives that? I'm really curious how all that business logic gets wrapped up. Is it as easy as, writing something in Stripe or Lemon Squeezy to handle these pricing calculations? Or are you like doing a bunch of number crunching in your back end?
So we just send it to Tinybird, and then we make so essentially what we do is we log all of the usage that you do through Tinybird, and then that gives us basically unlimited access to whatever we need. So we then send that as an invoice creation, and that gives us the numbers. So we don't really have any number crunching. It's all done as part of like the service that we have anyway. So we have all that analytical data. And then we just drive it.
So you've like some function that's like calculate bill, and it just looks at each one of these rules, tallies it all up, and then you do invoice creation.
Yep. Okay. So it's much easier that way than doing it the opposite way, which would be like querying your database for all the usage that you've done and then trying to figure out how to do it in Stripe. We originally did subscriptions through Stripe, and then it was just too inflexible, so we did our own.
I would figure because you're doing this based on usage or things like that. So you just can't rely on these payment providers to handle all that kind of custom business logic for you.
Yep. And if there's someone with a lot of usage, you end up hitting rate limiting problems with Stripe. And then it's just like, oh, okay, then I guess I'll figure it out our own way. So Andreas wrote like our own custom code for pricing that then just generates the invoices every month.
Sweet, man. It's like now you really sound like a real business. You know what I mean? Like, we have a back end job that runs once a month to generate customer invoices. Yeah.
Yep.
So, okay, talking about business stuff, what is the part that you hate? You're like, oh, the grass is not greener on the other side.
I mean, the paperwork sucks. There's a lot of that. Like tax season, it's horrible.
Oh yeah.
because
I
like
just got through that.
yeah, so like it's bad enough when you do your own personal taxes in the US, and then it's just compounded by like random rules that the IRS make up for businesses, like research and development. Like now you
Oh,
have to spend this
yeah.
time with a giant spreadsheet of all the money you've spent, and is this research or development? Like how much of your engineering team are doing research and development, like a percentage of time over time, and like what was an experiment, what wasn't an experiment. So this is this whole thing. So it took forever. And it just seemed to never end. I'd be like, okay, I'm done with taxes. And then like I get another email from our accounting team, like, hey, by the way, we need you to fill this form out now. And it's like, oh God. That kind of sucks. Doing those kinds of
Well,
paperwork.
can I
But
also ask, sorry, this is going down the weeds. I'm curious, that VC money, do you get that all in one lump sum?
Yeah.
Or is it like, okay.
Yep,
So then how do you do taxes on that? Is that over the lump sum or is that like?
So yeah, you don't pay taxes on that money.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you don't actually pay the taxes on the VC money. You pay the taxes
Wow.
on the revenue you generate, and it's not the revenue that you've generated.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
so they give you a bunch of money, and that's basically like just sits in your account, and then that pays for everything. But yeah, like when you do tax season, it's all revenue generation versus like expenditure and blah blah blah, and you still end up paying money. Even though we're like not cash positive at all, you still end up paying money for some reason, because the IRS doesn't actually care about how much everything costs and what is tax deductible and what's not is this whole thing. But
Just
yeah,
write it off.
yeah, exactly. It's just an expense. Write it off. It's fine. But yeah, going through that is kind of rough. And then also just talking to VCs is like a lot.
Really?
It just never stops. Like you'll get an email and they'll be like, hey, we want to talk to you. And it's like, do you have a calendar? And it's like, yes. Okay. So you send them your calendar and then that's another 30 minutes of your day gone.
Yeah.
And the more closer you get to like, okay, we're going to start raising a fund for the next round. Well, now your entire day is just basically VC meetings all day.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to tell the same story over and over again for new people. I think Andreas is now bored of my intro, which is like, oh, this is my name and I'm the CEO and I've been in the industry for the last 16 years and blah, blah, blah. And it's the same story every time. And he laughs every single time. And now I won't say it in front of him anymore unless we're in a VC meeting because he's just like heard it a million times. And it's always, it's just one of those things where you just have to be like on it all the time. And, trying to sell them the vision of what you're trying to build. But outside of that, everything else is pretty good. Once you're in that space, like a lot of things open up. So like a lot of CEOs talk to each other all day about like, oh, we're doing this and doing that. Love your feedback on this. How do you feel about this? Like, what was the problem with this? Like, there's a lot of that going on all the time, which makes life a lot easier because when you first start, it's very daunting of like, okay, I now have the pressure of like, if this folds, 5 people are going to lose their job, including myself, right? And now you have that pressure of like, well, if we don't succeed, like I have to tell these guys like, sorry, we didn't make it. We don't have any money to give you to tie you over until, you find your next job because we've run out. So all that pressure kind of sits in the background all the time. And the only other thing that sucks is the amount of hours you do. So as long as you have a supportive, like, your regular 9 to 5, maybe you do content creation on the side, which is what I've always done. And like you guys have done. So like, on days, most days I work anywhere from 7 a.m. till probably close to 10 p.m. And that doesn't include content creation. So then you have to do that on top. And it's like, oh God, this is a lot. But we try and work-life balance a lot. Like I'll remind Andreas that like, hey, the weekend is for you. So like, go and do something that isn't involved in the computer. Like take your computer with you in case something goes wrong. But like, you don't have to build the next feature over the weekend. And we try and instill that in our guys too. Like, hey, work your 8 hours and go home. Like if I see you online, I'm gonna DM you and be like, why are you here? Which is always fun. Because I've always been the opposite, right? Like I've always worked loads of hours, and now having the opposite side of being like, hey, go home and enjoy your family time, or go and play a video game, or whatever you want to do. Just don't be here. It'll be there tomorrow. Is something that we instill in all our guys.
Now, is Andreas local with you?
He's in Germany.
Oh,
so we're on two different time zones.
Wow.
We hadn't technically met until last week.
What?
Yeah, so the first time we met was we just had an offsite for our team. We went to the UK and we hung out for a week. And that was the first time we ever met.
That's fun.
That's insane.
Yeah. truly insane to build an entire company that's funded
and have millions of dollars.
Yeah, and never ever met them. Yeah.
So is it a US based company?
Yeah.
Technically? Okay.
Yeah. So
Delaware?
Yeah, of course. the only state to incorporate in. Yeah, my advice is if you're going to build a company, don't do it in any other country than the US. Especially Europe. Europe is really hard. And VCs tend to not want to fund European companies because they're really complex and they involve lots of lawyers and blah, blah, blah. Like it's very, very hard to give you money. Unlike the US where it's just like, cool, here's your wire details. I'll just send it to you right now. So,
did you like have a mini panic attack when that like $500,000 showed up at your door?
Yeah, a little bit. Because it's just like, oh God, now I have like $500,000 that like I'm now in control of, and we can basically do whatever we want with it. Like we don't have to give anyone our books and say like, oh, we spent $1,000 on a monitor for somebody. Like nobody's going to check really. And so that is kind of a scary thing to be like responsible for millions of dollars and making sure that like we allocate it in the right spots.
I'm sure the thought never crossed your mind where you're just like, a Lamborghini would definitely help this company right now.
Yeah. A Lambo that's wrapped in the Unkey name seems like a good idea to me. Yeah, that's never crossed our minds. But yeah, it's one of those funny things that it's like, okay, what do you spend the money on? Yeah. Right. So you've got all this money and you're like, oh, $1.5 million is insane. Like for a regular person, that's an insane amount of money to have. But for a company, it's like a small amount of money. So like, how do we decide how to pay people? How do we decide the equipment that they get or the benefits or all those things are like questions that you have to ask yourself. And it was like a
more paperwork.
whole, it's like a whole thing of like, okay, paperwork time. Like, let's figure out how much we can actually afford. And if we hire one more person, how does that affect how long we can run the business if we don't get another round? Like all those things come into consideration all the time.
Right, because it's not like you get it's not like you get $1 million and you like buy a bunch of services to help build the product. You don't need that, right? Operating costs, I'm assuming, are fairly low. It's like, how can I get more hands-on keyboards to continue to build the things that we want to do?
Yeah. So like our operating costs from like an infrastructure is quite small, but like our biggest expense overall is the people.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to pay me, you got to pay Andres, you've got to pay health insurance in the US, you got to do you got to hire people, like, it's different in another country. So like, how does that work? And it's all those kinds of things that come into play.
How do you feel that like that your take home pay is now versus working at your previous company? Are you choosing to take less and sacrifice for the company, or are you like, hey, we're building something cool, give me a little bonus here?
Yeah, so we both ironically got like pay raises right before we left. So we both just didn't take the pay raises that we got and just reduced to what we were. And we talked about it, like, what's the minimum that we could do each kind of thing? Like, well, okay, if we need to reduce our salaries later, like, what's the minimum number? Right. So we talked about that and we had a discussion, and like, I could be technically I could making lots more money if I just went to another company and was just like, hey, you can hire me, and this is how much you should pay me. But you do it for like the main reason, like, this is a vision and this is a dream and this is like what we want to build. So I'd rather take less money to build that and give more money to my guys who work really hard every day. And that's the case for a lot of CEOs, like in startups, where they take a lot less money. And once you get to like a Series B, maybe you give yourself a pay raise, but in the meantime, you just take the minimum that you can take and just go from there.
Yep. Well, I think that's all the questions I have. This was awesome. Amy, do you have anything else?
Loved it. No, that's awesome. We can do picks and plugs. Do you still want to do picks and plugs?
I'm down. James, do you have anything else you want to like say that we missed?
No, I think that's it. I think we're good.
This is good.
I loved it. It's one of my favorites. But I've been saying that a lot lately. Awesome. Well, we'll get into the next segment of the show where we pick something that we like and plug something in general, something that we're working on. Who wants to go first?
I got things to plug that
Do
aren't
it.
mine.
Do it.
Big thing. Rise Calendar is a huge thing that we use. It's RISE calendar. And essentially it's just another calendar, but it comes with cool built-in features such as like time zoning, so you can actually see where your
Nice.
people are. Especially, it's how many times you've done the PST to EST conversion, like 1,000,000 times. Like you don't have to do that. It just shows like hey, Andreas is its current time is X, and you can
Mhm.
book on the calendar based upon like that. And it also gives you flexibility. So when you book a calendar event through it, it will make it flexible by default. So, like, if, for example, Brad, your day is open and then all of a sudden you get 20 meetings that you have to attend, it will then go and find the next optimum spot for the meeting. Might be the next day or the next week or
Nice.
whatever. And it allows you to put focus time on your calendar. So you can
That's
just,
awesome.
it will automatically, after you get X amount of time blocked out, it will say, hey, okay, the next 4 hours, like no one can book you on the calendar. So we use this a lot. It's free up to 5 team members. If you've got like a small team, you can use it. Or you can just use it yourself and you can send links through that and people can book you right through that, kind of like cow.com.
Sweet.
Really good. We love it. We use it because we have time zones everywhere and it gets far too confusing to figure out what time is not 6 a.m. for someone.
Yeah.
Definitely one of our great picks.
That's awesome. I haven't heard of that one. What else would you like to plug or pick?
I mean, I'll plug Unkey all day,
Yeah,
but I've
do
just
it.
done that for an hour.
Well, let me include the link in the chat.
Yeah.
People should definitely go check it out.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
And
check
there is a free
include
plan. So
Yep. There is a free plan and it's pretty generous, especially for rate limiting. If you're thinking of like doing rate limiting on your endpoints, it's pretty generous. It's like 100K. And if you're using more than that, it's $25 and you get 2.5 million. And yeah, we think it's really cool. And I'm really, really proud of what the team's built.
as you should be. I'm also going to stick in the chat a link to your Twitter or X.
Yep.
And
Whatever it's
since you're
called this
talking
week.
about, yeah, I know. Part of me like wants to just call it Twitter out of spite, every time.
it will always be Twitter.
Yeah, it'll always be
never
Twitter.
X.
It will never be X, exactly.
And then since you were talking about content creation, I also included links to YouTube.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yep, of course. Brad, what you got?
Let's see. So we got a new puppy, and one of the big parts of raising a puppy is training it. And so we got these very specific treats from a place called Pupford. This dude named Zach George has this whole platform for like teaching you how to train your dog, and he sells these treats that are like really they go crazy for. So I'll put the link in chat here. It's meant to be like mixed in with their regular food, and so it's just like but they're like extra valuable. They like it a lot. They respond to it really good. So that's what we've been using all day, every day to train the dog. And then I guess I'll just plug my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Brad Garrepy. I've been trying to put out more videos lately on Remix. And yeah, trying to get monetized eventually here at some point.
Do it.
That's what I got. Amy, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm going to pick this. It's a Mac only app. So my apologies, PC friend. It's called Batteries. And you might be thinking, well, that's kind of dumb. My Mac already tells me my battery usage, or I also use iStat, my menu bar that also has battery functionality. But what I like about this particular app is that it will notify me when something's about to go low. So for example, when I unplug my AirPods, if the case is about to go low and it's about to die, it'll say, hey, you got 20%. Because otherwise, 9 times out of 10, I'm sitting in a meeting and it just dies. Or like my trackpad or my keyboard, it will tell me this is how much you have left. And so it's just good to have that heads up versus it just dying. So I've really enjoyed that app.
That's pretty sweet. Yeah, I like that. Like, I'm not a huge fan of Mac apps. I feel like they don't bring that much use, like because Raycast
use
just
them
does
all the
everything for
time.
me. But like this is neat. Like I like the notifications. It's like I
Mhm.
need to go do something right now.
Mhm. Now I say I like the apps, but Raycast has consolidated a lot of them for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. And then I will pick my YouTube channel as well. So it's been a few months since I've posted, but I have quite a bit of content that's getting ready to drop. So if you want to see that, you should go subscribe. My
Oh.
handle is self-teach-me. So I'll include a link to that within the chat.
Can you give us a sneak peek about what's about to drop? Or
Yeah, so we kind of touched on it a little bit, maybe last week, a couple weeks ago. I'm working on a project with Sentry right now where I'm building an application 6 different ways. So I'm building it on Next.js with their app router, their pages router, on Redwood, on Remix, on Astro, and on Svelte. And so I'm creating video content around that and all the differences. So it's one of those things that you can talk about the differences and how you might structure things, or like from a philosophical standpoint, but to actually see the code and see, oh, this takes 200 lines of code, whereas it only takes 50 lines of code over here. Like that stuff's really interesting. And if you have the same developer working on it, then the style is the same. It's not like, oh, this developer is just a little bit more succinct.
this is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So check it out. Self-teach me.
Cool.
Well, James, thanks again. We'll have you on 2 more times for that SNL jacket.
Yep. Looking forward to it. Can't wait for my fancy jacket and be the first.
Yes, for sure. Well, if you are listening in a podcatcher, or even if you're not, go to a podcatcher and give us a rating and review. That will help us get more guests, get more sponsors. Again, shout out to Postman for sponsoring this particular episode. And in the meantime, that's all we got. Awesome. So that's goodbye number 1. Thanks everybody for hanging out online. Looks like we have a few Twitter listeners. Always enjoy seeing that number. But yeah, hope you guys have a good Wednesday, and we will catch you again next week, same time, same place.